Hello and welcome back to the Sleep RPG. Close your eyes and relax as you listen to the story of the Hunter's Nightmare. Deep within the twisted corridors of Gehrman's past lies a nightmare that refuses to end. A realm where hunters who lost themselves to bloodlust are condemned to hunt eternally, their minds fractured, their humanity stripped away piece by agonizing piece. This is the Hunter's Nightmare, a cursed dimension born from the sins of those who came before, a prison constructed not by stone and iron, but by guilt and divine retribution, by the weight of atrocities that can never be forgiven or forgotten. As we peel back the layers of this harrowing expansion to Bloodborne, we find ourselves confronting the darkest secrets of the healing church, the tragic fates of legendary hunters who became monsters, and the terrible price of forbidden knowledge that should never have been pursued. The Old Hunters expansion stands as one of the most compelling pieces of downloadable content ever crafted for a video game, a masterpiece of environmental storytelling and atmospheric horror that builds upon Bloodborne's already impressive foundation. Released in November of 2015, it doesn't simply add new areas and bosses to Bloodborne's existing world. Rather, it fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the game's central narrative, revealing the origins of the hunt itself and exposing the atrocities that set Gehrman's nightmare into motion. Every weapon we discover tells a story of the hunter who wielded it and how they fell. Every boss we face represents a fallen legend, someone who was once celebrated and admired, but who ultimately succumbed to the very darkness they fought against. Every grotesque experiment we witness in the research hall speaks to the Church's insatiable hunger for transcendence, their willingness to sacrifice countless innocent lives in pursuit of contact with beings beyond mortal comprehension, no matter the human cost, no matter the suffering inflicted. What makes this expansion so mesmerizing is how it functions as both prequel and epilogue, both origin story and final chapter. We journey backward through time, witnessing the sins that created the nightmare, while simultaneously experiencing the eternal consequences of those actions in their most horrifying form. The hunters trapped here are not simply ghosts of the past, ethereal memories fading with time. They are timeless prisoners, forever reenacting their blood-soaked hunts with mechanical precision, forever seeking beasts that can never truly be slain because the beasts are themselves, their own corrupted souls made manifest. And at the heart of it all lies a fishing village by the shore, a corpse of a great one washed upon the beach like driftwood, and a curse that would echo through generations, claiming victims who weren't even born when the original sin was committed. The DLC forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about heroism and villainy. The legendary hunters we've heard about in the main game, figures like Ludwig and Lady Maria, who are spoken of with reverence, are revealed to be deeply flawed individuals who participated in or enabled terrible crimes. The Healing Church, which presents itself as Gehrman's savior and protector, is shown to be fundamentally corrupt, built upon a foundation of massacre and torture. The very concept of the hunt itself, which seems noble on its surface, is revealed to be a trap that inevitably corrupts those who participate in it for too long. There are no clear heroes in the old hunters, only victims and perpetrators, and often the same person occupies both categories simultaneously. Your journey into the hunter's nightmare begins not with fanfare or grand ceremony, but with a subtle shift in reality, a moment where the world seems to hold its breath before plunging you into darkness. After defeating Vicar Amelia in her beastly form and touching the skull atop the altar in the Grand Cathedral, the world transforms from day to night, the sky darkening as if some great celestial clock has struck an ominous hour. This transition itself is deeply significant, for it represents Gehrman crossing a threshold, moving deeper into the nightmare that has always lurked beneath its civilized veneer, like rot beneath pristine wood. When you return to the hunter's dream, that strange refuge between worlds where time flows differently and death loses its finality, you find the eye of a blood-drunk hunter waiting for you on the steps where you first received your weapons, placed there by the messengers who serve you with their strange, wordless devotion. This eye is no ordinary trinket, no simple bauble or curiosity to be collected and forgotten. Its description tells us in uncertain terms that all hunters who become blood-drunk are destined for the hunter's nightmare, drawn there as inexorably as moths to flame, unable to resist the pull of that cursed realm, no matter how strong their will or pure their intentions. The item serves as both key and warning, a passport to damnation and a final chance to turn back before crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. By possessing it, you mark yourself as someone who seeks the nightmare, someone who cannot turn away from the terrible truths hidden in blood and shadow, someone willing to descend into the depths to uncover what others would prefer remain buried forever. The messengers, those strange infantile creatures who seem to exist between worlds, who serve hunters with unwavering loyalty, yet remain fundamentally alien and unknowable, present it to you because they recognize something in you, a quality that makes you suited for this journey into damnation. Perhaps they see in you the same curiosity that drove the Bergenwerth scholars to their doom, or perhaps they simply know that destiny has already chosen your path. To physically enter the nightmare, you must return to Cathedral Ward, to the plaza just outside Eden Chapel where you've stood countless times before, a place that should feel safe and familiar. There, if you stand in the right spot and wait with the eye of a blood-drunk hunter in your possession, a lesser amygdala will reach down from the invisible heights above and grasp you in its many-limbed grip, its spindly arms extending from empty air as if tearing through the fabric of reality itself. These creatures, these cosmic beings who hang like grotesque chandeliers throughout Gehrman, unseen by those who lack insight yet always present, always watching with their countless eyes, serve as gatekeepers between dimensions. Their ability to perceive and manipulate reality allows them to pluck chosen individuals from the waking world and deposit them into nightmare realms with the casual ease of a gardener transplanting flowers. The transition is jarring, disorienting, a sensation like falling while standing still. One moment you stand in the familiar plaza of Cathedral Ward, the cobblestones solid beneath your feet, the architecture of Gehrman surrounding you with its Gothic grandeur. The next moment, reality seems to ripple and fold, and you find yourself in a twisted reflection of that same location, a dark mirror showing a distorted version of what was. But this is Cathedral Ward as it existed in the past, during the scouring of old Gehrman, during that terrible period when the hunt was at its most brutal and the church's hunters had fully embraced their savage calling, when mercy became weakness and blood became purpose. The architecture is familiar yet profoundly wrong, warped by the nightmare's influence into something that exists outside normal space and time, buildings leaning at impossible angles, streets that seem to loop back on themselves, doors that open onto vistas that shouldn't exist. The first thing you notice upon arriving is the blood. It's absolutely everywhere, not just splattered on walls in the patterns of violence, but flowing in actual rivers, collecting in pools deep enough to wade through, creating entire waterways of crimson that course through the streets like some grotesque parody of Venice's canals. This is not merely blood from the hunt, not simply the aftermath of battles between hunters and beasts. This is the blood of sins, the accumulated violence of generations of hunters made manifest and eternal in this cursed realm. Every drop of blood shed in the name of the hunt collected here and preserved forever. The river of blood that flows through the nightmare is both literal and metaphorical, a physical representation of the bloodlust that corrupts all who hunt too long and too eagerly, who forget that the line between hunter and monster grows thinner with each kill. The second thing you notice, perhaps even more disturbing than the rivers of blood, is the hunters themselves. They wander the nightmare in various states of degradation, some still clinging desperately to their weapons, and fighting techniques like drowning men, clutching driftwood, others reduced to mindless savagery that makes them indistinguishable from the beasts they once hunted. These are the old hunters, the legendary warriors who once protected Gehrman from the beast scourge, whose names were spoken with reverence and whose deeds inspired songs and stories. Now they are condemned to hunt forever in this prison of their own making, their legendary status transformed into a curse that binds them to eternal violence. They wear the garb of an earlier era, before Ludwig standardized the church's hunter attire into the uniforms we see in the main game, before the hunt became institutionalized and regulated. Their weapons are crude but devastatingly effective, designed for maximum bloodshed rather than efficiency or elegance, tools meant to kill quickly and messily rather than with any pretense of honor or mercy. And they are hostile, every single one of them, without exception. Every old hunter you encounter will attack you on sight with murderous intent, their eyes vacant or burning with madness, for in their maddened state they can no longer distinguish between beast and human, between threat and ally, between friend and foe. To them, everything that moves is prey. Everything that breathes must be hunted. Everything that lives must die. This is the ultimate fate of all hunters who lose themselves to blood, to become nothing more than beasts themselves in all but form, trapped in an eternal cycle of violence that has no meaning and no end, killing not for protection or duty, but simply because killing is all they know how to do anymore. They are what you might become if you're not careful, if you let the blood intoxicate you, if you forget why you hunt and hunt simply for the sake of hunting. The atmosphere of the hunter's nightmare is oppressive in ways that are difficult to articulate. The air feels thick, heavy, like breathing through cloth. The sky above is wrong, too dark and too bright simultaneously, lit by a moon that seems larger than it should be, more present, more accusatory. Sounds carry strangely here, echoes lingering longer than they should, screams seeming to come from directions where nothing stands. The nightmare has a quality of wrongness that goes beyond its visual horror, something that affects you on a primal level, triggering instincts that tell you this place is fundamentally opposed to life, to sanity, to everything natural and right in the world. To understand the hunter's nightmare in its full horror, we must first understand how it came to be, the chain of events and decisions that led to this realm of eternal suffering. The nightmare is not a natural phenomenon, not some quirk of cosmic geography or metaphysical accident. It is a curse, deliberately placed upon the hunters by a dying Great One, in response to unspeakable atrocities committed against her and her children, atrocities so profound that they demanded eternal punishment. This Great One is Kos, or as some say, Kosum, a being who dwells in the deepest parts of the ocean, in realms so far removed from human comprehension that even glimpsing her true nature risks shattering the mind like glass struck with a hammer. Kos washed ashore on the coast of a small fishing village, already dead or dying from causes that remain unknown and unknowable. Her massive corpse, resembling some impossible hybrid of fish, mollusk, and woman, a fusion of forms that should not exist together, yet somehow do, became the center of the village's life and spiritual practice. The inhabitants, already mutated by exposure to her cosmic power even before her death, their bodies transformed by proximity to a being from beyond the stars, began to worship her as a deity, as the mother who gave them everything. They harvested the parasites that lived within her body, those strange tentacled creatures that seemed to be part of Kos herself, using them for fuel to light their lamps, for food to sustain their bodies, for light to chase away the darkness of their humble existence. They prayed to her even in death, believing her presence to be a blessing from the cosmos itself, a gift from the infinite void beyond the stars. To them, Kos was not dead, but transformed, her physical form left behind, while her true essence joined with the cosmic ocean from which all great ones emerge. But Kos's arrival did not go unnoticed by the outside world. The scholars of Byrgenwerth, that august institution always seeking to elevate humanity through contact with the Great Ones, through understanding the beings that exist beyond mortal ken, learned of the village and its divine corpse through means we can only speculate about. Perhaps a merchant brought tales of the strange fishing village where the people had changed. Perhaps a scholar on an expedition stumbled upon the settlement by accident. However they learned of it, the knowledge reached them, and they understood immediately its profound significance. Master Willem, the institution's founder and its guiding intellect, believed firmly that the Great Ones were linked to the sea, that within the depths of the ocean lay the secrets of ascension, the keys to transcending human limitations and achieving a higher state of being. When word reached him that a Great One had actually washed ashore, that one of these cosmic beings was accessible rather than dwelling in unreachable dimensions, he saw an opportunity that could not be ignored, a chance that might never come again. What happened next would become the original sin that echoes through all of Bloodborne's narrative like a funeral bell. Willem sent his scholars and hunters to the fishing village, a delegation of Byrgenwerth's finest minds and most capable warriors. But they did not go to study or to understand, not to learn from the villagers who had lived with Kos's presence, not to seek communion with the divine in any meaningful sense. They went to take. They wanted eyes, the eyes on the inside that Willem believed were necessary for transcendence, the physical manifestation of insight and cosmic understanding. They wanted the secrets locked within Kos's corpse, whatever knowledge might be extracted from dissecting and analyzing a Great One's physical form. They wanted to examine her unborn child, to understand how a Great One reproduces and what that might teach them about the nature of existence itself. And they were willing to pay any cost to obtain these things, a cost that would be extracted not from themselves, but from the villagers. The massacre at the Fishing Hamlet was not a battle between equal forces. It was not a conflict where both sides had a chance at victory. It was a systematic slaughter, a one-sided extermination carried out with clinical efficiency and ruthless determination. The scholars and hunters methodically murdered the villagers, every man, woman and child who stood between them and their goals. Based on what we know of Willem's obsession with gaining eyes and the similar experiments conducted later in the research hall, it seems likely they cut open skulls in search of eyes that might have formed from exposure to Kos's cosmic presence, treating living human beings as nothing more than experimental subjects whose consent was irrelevant. They defiled Kos's corpse with instruments and procedures we can only imagine, extracting whatever they could from her dead flesh, violating her remains in ways that would have been unthinkable to the villagers who worshipped her. And most damning of all, most unforgivable in the cosmic scheme of things, they took her child, the orphan that was still within her at the time of her death, or perhaps emerged as she died, tearing it from its mother's body to study and dissect, to understand and exploit, treating the offspring of a god as nothing more than a fascinating specimen for their research. Among those who participated in this atrocity were some of the most legendary figures of Gehrman's history, names that would be spoken with reverence for generations. Gehrman, the first hunter, master of the blade and teacher of countless warriors, was there, his skill with weapons employed not against beasts, but against innocent people. His student Lady Maria was there, and the experiments would break something fundamental in her soul, shattering her ideals, but leaving her unable to continue living with what she had done. Laurence would go on to found the healing church and transform Gehrman into what it would become. It was likely among them as well, given his close association with Byrgenwerth at the time, and his ambitions that were already leading him down the path that would eventually see him transformed into a monstrous cleric beast consumed by flame. These were not evil people in the conventional sense, not cackling villains who delighted in causing pain. They were seekers of knowledge, scholars, warriors who believed in the possibility of human transcendence people can The price of a single fishing village was worth paying for the salvation of all mankind. They told themselves they were doing what was necessary, that the greater good justified the immediate horror, that the ends would ultimately vindicate the means. But the great ones, as we learn from various runes and item descriptions scattered throughout Bloodborne, from the fragments of knowledge we can piece together, are sympathetic in spirit. They are not distant and uncaring as we might expect cosmic entities to be. They answer prayers and requests from those who call upon them, forming bonds and granting boons to mortals who seek their aid. And as the villagers of the Fishing Hamlet lay dying in pools of their own blood, as their corpses were violated, and their sacred mother was defiled, as their children were murdered, and their homes were destroyed, they prayed with their final breaths. They prayed for vengeance against those who had done this terrible thing. They prayed for justice to be visited upon the scholars and hunters who had destroyed their lives. They prayed that those who had committed these atrocities would suffer as they had suffered, that the perpetrators would know the same pain and fear and helpless rage that filled the villagers' final moments. Kos, even in death, her consciousness existing on a cosmic plane beyond death and life as we understand them, heard those prayers. Her awareness, which transcends physical form and persists in realms we cannot perceive, reached out and created the hunter's nightmare in response to those desperate pleas for justice. It was not simply a realm of punishment, not merely a prison designed to cause suffering for its own sake. It was a perfect, terrible justice, a curse that embodied the principle of cosmic retribution. Every hunter who became drunk with blood, who lost themselves to the violence of the hunt, who forgot their humanity in pursuit of beasts, who crossed the line from protector to monster, would be drawn into this nightmare regardless of whether they had personally participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre. There they would hunt forever, finding no rest, no peace, no escape from the violence they had embraced. They would become the very things they had once hunted, mindless and savage, forever stalking through blood-soaked streets in search of prey that could never truly satisfy, caught in an endless loop of violence that strips away everything that makes them human. The curse was not limited to those who participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, which would have been justice in its purest form, a punishment precisely targeted at those who deserved it. Instead, it extended to subsequent generations of hunters, to those who had nothing to do with the original atrocity, but who walked the same bloody path, claiming anyone who became too drunk with blood, too lost in the violence of the hunt, too enamored with killing to remember why they began hunting in the first place. This transgenerational nature of the curse transforms it from simple punishment into something far more insidious and far-reaching. The sins of the past continue to claim victims in the present, and will claim victims in the future, creating a cycle of violence and suffering that seems unbreakable, a wheel that turns eternally, crushing new victims with each rotation. The mechanism of the curse reveals a cruel cosmic justice. It doesn't claim hunters arbitrarily or randomly pluck victims from the world. It waits, watches, and recognizes the moment when a hunter crosses an invisible line, when they transition from protector to predator, when the blood they've shed and consumed transforms them into something other than human. This transformation can be gradual, so slow that the hunter themselves might not notice it happening. One day they're fighting to save innocence, driven by noble purpose and genuine compassion. The next day, perhaps years later, they realize they're hunting for the thrill of it, for the rush of violence, for the satisfaction of watching something die by their hand. And that's when the nightmare reaches out with spectral fingers and claims them, pulling them into its eternal torment, where they will hunt forever, never resting, never finding peace, eternally repeating the violence that defined their final years as living beings, until the distinction between their waking self and their nightmare self becomes meaningless. What makes this particularly horrifying is the implication that the curse is patient. It's not a one-time event that ended when Kos placed it. It's an ongoing, active force that continues to judge hunters across all of time since the Fishing Hamlet massacre. Every hunter who takes up weapons, who consumes blood to enhance their abilities, who kills in the name of protecting Gehrman, is at risk. The curse hangs over them like a sword suspended by a thread, and they must be constantly vigilant against letting bloodlust consume them. One mistake, one moment of excessive cruelty, one hunt undertaken for the wrong reasons, and they might find themselves drawn into the nightmare forever. When you first enter the hunter's nightmare, crossing that threshold between realities through the amygdala's many-limbed grasp, you find yourself in a distorted version of Cathedral Ward and Central Gehrman, places you know intimately from the main game, but rendered alien and wrong through the nightmare's corrupting influence. But this is not simply a recreation, not a mere copy of familiar locations. The nightmare has taken the familiar architecture and twisted it with the logic of dreams and madness, combining different locations and time periods into a single impossible space where cause and effect function by rules that have nothing to do with normal physics or geography. The grand staircase that leads up to where the grand cathedral should be, that impressive climb you've made countless times in the waking world, is here flanked by beast patients, those unfortunate souls who represent the early stages of the scourge, their transformation incomplete and agonizing. These creatures, wrapped in bandages and restraints that can no longer contain what they're becoming, shamble and crawl with desperate aggression, attacking anything that comes near with a ferocity born from pain and confusion. The presence of beast patients is deeply significant when we consider the timeline and nature of this nightmare realm. They tell us that this version of the nightmare is set during or shortly after the outbreak of Ashen Blood in Old Gehrman, that terrible plague that would eventually be revealed as an experiment conducted by the healing church itself, a field test of how blood ministration could be weaponized and controlled. This was a time when the beast scourge was at its absolute peak, when the transformation of humans into monsters reached epidemic proportions, when the hunters were needed most urgently to contain a threat that was spiraling out of control, and when they began to lose themselves most completely to the violence of their calling, becoming the very monsters they hunted. The nightmare has chosen to manifest this particular moment in Gehrman's history, because it represents the hunt at its worst, the point where the line between hunter and beast became almost invisible. Wandering among the beast patients are the old hunters themselves, and encountering them for the first time is a jarring, unsettling experience that immediately communicates how dangerous this nightmare truly is. Unlike the hunter enemies you may have faced in the main game, who are formidable but ultimately manageable, these warriors are relentless and skilled in ways that speak to decades or centuries of experience, their techniques honed to deadly perfection. They use a bewildering variety of weapons, from the beast cutter's long-range slashes that can catch you from distances you thought were safe, to the boom hammer's explosive strikes that fill the air with fire and force, to the beast hunter's scythe's rapid transforming attacks that flow from one form to another with liquid grace. Some wield the Gatling gun, a weapon so excessive, so over the top in its destructive potential that it speaks volumes about the escalating arms race between hunters and beasts, about how the hunt drove people to create ever more violent, destructive tools in their desperate bid to maintain control. Each variant of Old Hunter tells us something profound about the evolution of the hunt, about how the practice changed and developed over time, about how desperation and bloodlust shaped the tools and techniques employed. The beast cutter, for instance, is a weapon designed for maximum reach and brutal efficiency, a tool that can strike from safety, share a barbed edge with mechanical precision. Its description tells us it was a favorite among the Konakliks, a group of hunters who believed in using any means necessary to slay. Beasts, even if those means were considered excessive or crude by others, even if their methods caused collateral damage or violated the unwritten rules of honorable combat. The boom hammer, meanwhile, literally incorporates a miniature furnace into its design, a feat of engineering that seems almost mad in its excess, igniting upon each strike to create devastating explosions that can kill hunter and beast alike, if not wielded with perfect precision. These weapons speak to a time when hunters were willing to use increasingly violent and destructive methods in their war against the beasts, when the fear of the scourge overrode any concerns about restraint or proportionality. The nightmare version of the Eden Chapel stands as a twisted mockery of its counterpart in the waking world, a perversion that feels intentionally cruel in its inversion of meaning and purpose. In the main game, Eden Chapel serves as a safe haven, a sanctuary, a rare place where you can send innocent NPCs to protect them from the hunt that rages through Gehrman's streets. The chapel represents hope and civilization, a reminder that not all spaces are hostile, that protection and safety are still possible even in a city consumed by nightmare. But here in the hunter's nightmare, the chapel is transformed into something very different. It is a place of danger and death, its interior filled with hostile hunters who attack on sight and beasts that lurk in the shadows, waiting to ambush unwary explorers. There is no safety to be found within its walls, no refuge from the violence that pervades every corner of this cursed realm. The chapel's transformation from sanctuary to slaughterhouse is not accidental but deliberate, a calculated desecration. The nightmare takes the symbols and structures of civilization, the icons of faith and protection and order, and perverts them systematically, showing what they truly were beneath the veneer of respectability and righteousness. The message is clear. The institutions that claimed to protect people, that presented themselves as sanctuaries and sources of healing, were always places of death and suffering, and the nightmare simply makes visible what was always true, but hidden from view. As you explore deeper into the hunter's nightmare, you discover shortcuts and hidden paths that feel hauntingly familiar. There's a dark building filled with explosive barrels and a wheelchair-bound figure clutching the boom hammer. There's a blood river flowing where normal streets should be, and within that river crawl bloodlickers, those grotesque insectoid creatures that feed on spilled blood and grow fat with it. The bloodlickers are particularly disturbing because they represent the logical endpoint of blood obsession. They are creatures of pure consumption, existing only to drink and absorb more blood, growing larger and more powerful with each feeding. This area also introduces you to your guide through the nightmare, Simon the Harrowed. You'll encounter him near a shortcut that leads back to the first lamp, and his initial greeting is both welcoming and ominous. He recognizes that you are a hunter who still has your sanity, unlike the countless blood-drunk hunters who wander these twisted streets. Simon becomes your companion and informant throughout the DLC, offering insights into what the nightmare truly represents, and urging you to uncover the secrets that the healing church would prefer to keep buried. The geography of the hunter's nightmare is deliberately disorienting. Paths that should lead one place instead take you somewhere entirely different. Time and space function by nightmare logic rather than rational physics. You might climb a ladder and find yourself emerging somewhere that should be miles away. You might descend into a cellar and discover a vast cathedral that could never physically fit in that location. This spatial impossibility reinforces the nightmare's nature as a curse and a prison, a place where normal rules don't apply and escape is impossible. One of the most striking features of the hunter's nightmare is the presence of dead amygdalas scattered throughout the area. These massive cosmic beings, which hang from buildings and towers in the waking world of Gehrman, are here found as corpses, their many limbs shriveled and lifeless. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of the nightmare itself. Are these amygdalas from the past, creatures that died during some ancient conflict? Or does their presence suggest that even the great ones themselves are not immune to the nightmare's influence, that they too can be trapped and destroyed within this cursed realm? At the end of the grand staircase, Beyond the plaza filled with beast patients and old hunters lies a cathedral. But before you can enter it, you must pass through a nightmare within the nightmare. You descend through underground passages and caverns, wading through rivers of blood and corpses, fighting your way past bloodthirsty enemies. The atmosphere grows heavier with each step, and you can hear something ahead, a sound that's neither beast nor human, a shrieking, whinnying cry that speaks to madness and pain. Then you enter Ludwig's boss arena, and the full horror of what awaits becomes clear. The chamber is relatively small, its floor covered in blood and corpses, and in that confined space lurks something that was once a man. Ludwig the Accursed is a grotesque fusion of horse and human, his body twisted into a quadrupedal form with elongated limbs and a distended torso. His face, if it can still be called that, is all teeth and wild eyes, and from his back hangs what appears to be a human head, a second face that seems to scream silently at the wrongness of what Ludwig has become. This is Ludwig, the first church hunter, the legendary figure who established the Healing Church workshop and created a new paradigm for how hunters would fight the beast scourge. Before Ludwig, hunters followed Gehrman's teachings, emphasizing speed, skill, and precision. Gehrman's weapons, like the burial blade and the saw cleaver, required extensive training and dexterity to wield effectively. But Ludwig saw that this approach, while elegant, was not sufficient for the growing threat of the beasts. So Ludwig created a new workshop under the auspices of the Healing Church, and from this workshop came weapons designed for power rather than finesse. The Kirkhammer, which transforms from a simple sword into a massive stone hammer. Ludwig's Holy Blade itself, which combines a silver sword with an enormous metal sheath to create a devastating greatsword. These weapons didn't require years of training to use effectively. A common Gehrmanite, with minimal instruction, could pick up a Kirkhammer and use it to smash a beast's skull. This democratization of the hunt allowed the Healing Church to recruit far more hunters, creating an army to combat the scourge. Ludwig himself was a figure of idealism and nobility. He genuinely believed in the righteousness of his cause and the honor of the hunt. He encouraged his hunters to become noble blades in service to the Healing Church, to see themselves as protectors rather than killers. He was guided by a vision, a thread of light that he believed came from a divine source, showing him the way forward. His fellow hunters admired him, even if some questioned his idealism and others mocked his earnestness. But Ludwig's fate, as we see in the nightmare, was to become exactly the kind of monster he had spent his life fighting. The transformation into a beast is a constant threat for all hunters. The more you hunt, the more blood you consume, the more you open yourself to the scourge. And for church hunters in particular, the risk was even greater. The Sword Hunter badge tells us explicitly that church clerics became the most horrific beasts. There's something about the combination of religious fervor, blood consumption, and violence that accelerates the transformation. When Ludwig fell to the scourge, he became a cleric beast, but one of unprecedented size and savagery. His horse-like appearance is unique among beasts in Bloodborne, suggesting that his transformation was influenced by something beyond the normal scourge. One interpretation is that Ludwig's horse form represents his role as a knight, a mounted warrior who led charges into battle. Another is that it connects to his noble ideals, to the image of the chivalrous horseman riding forth to protect the innocent. The nightmare took those ideals and perverted them, transforming Ludwig's nobility into a monstrous travesty. Fighting Ludwig in his beast form is a chaotic, desperate experience. He attacks with savage fury, biting, clawing, and charging across the arena. He can rear up on his hind legs and crash down with crushing force. He can vomit arcane energy in devastating sprays. His movements are unpredictable, sometimes almost random, as if the beast fighting you has completely lost any sense of strategy or intelligence. This is what the nightmare has done to the first church hunter, It has reduced him to pure instinct, pure violence, a creature that exists only to hunt and kill. But then, when you've depleted his health to roughly half, something miraculous happens. Ludwig sees something in the blood-soaked arena, something that causes a flicker of recognition in his maddened eyes. He reaches out and grasps it. The holy moonlight sword, his true weapon, the blade that guided him throughout his life. The sword begins to glow with ethereal light, channeling cosmic energies, and as Ludwig lifts it, he begins to change. The transformation from Ludwig the Accursed to Ludwig the Holy Blade is one of the most powerful moments in all of Bloodborne. His body shifts, becoming more upright, more human. His movements become controlled and purposeful. The mindless beast gives way to something that remembers what it once was. The holy moonlight sword has restored a piece of Ludwig's humanity, allowing him to fight with honor and skill one final time. The music changes as well, shifting from the chaotic strings of his beast phase to a more orchestral, almost majestic theme that befits the legendary hunter he once was. In his second phase, Ludwig fights like a true swordsman. He performs elaborate combos with his massive blade, the sword leaving trails of light with each swing. He can channel arcane power through the weapon, creating waves of energy that sweep across the arena. He leaps and spins with grace that seems impossible for something of his size. This is Ludwig, as he should be remembered. A master warrior wielding a legendary blade in defense of what he believes is right. The holy moonlight sword itself is an object of mystery. Its description tells us that it channels the abyssal cosmos, suggesting a connection to the eldritch powers that lie beyond human comprehension. The sword may have been discovered in the Chalice dungeons beneath Gehrman, retrieved during one of Ludwig's expeditions into those ancient labyrinths. Or it might have been given to him by a great one, perhaps the moon presence itself, as a tool to further the goals of cosmic beings we cannot fully understand. Whatever its origin, the sword became Ludwig's guiding light, literally and figuratively, showing him the way forward in his darkest moments. When you finally defeat Ludwig, his body collapses, but his head remains alive, separated from his monstrous torso. If you approach him, he will speak to you, his words halting and confused. He asks if you've seen the light, the thread that guided him. If you're wearing church attire, he will ask whether the church hunters kept to their valorous purpose, whether his legacy remained untarnished. Your answer matters. If you tell him yes, that his hunters stayed true, he dies peacefully, believing his sacrifices meant something. If you tell him no, he descends into wailing despair, understanding that everything he built led only to corruption and horror. If you leave Ludwig's head alive and progress further into the DLC, Simon the Harrowed will eventually appear and put an arrow through Ludwig's eye, a mercy kill performed with respect. Simon, despite everything, still admires Ludwig as a hero, as someone who truly believed in the nobility of the hunt, even as that belief led to his damnation. Beyond Ludwig's arena lies a massive elevator shaft, and at its bottom you find another cathedral, a replica of the grand cathedral from the waking world. But this cathedral is different. It has been converted into something else entirely, something that speaks to the healing church's willingness to commit any atrocity in pursuit of ascension. This is the research hall, and it is one of the most disturbing locations in all of Bloodborne. The research hall is a vertical structure, a spiral of platforms and staircases surrounding a central chamber filled with poisonous liquid. The first thing you notice as you enter are the patients, if they can still be called that. These were once people, Gehrmanites, who came to the healing church seeking healing, or who were brought here for the church's experiments. Now they are barely recognizable as human. Their heads have been grotesquely enlarged, swollen with fluid, until they resemble massive tumors barely supported by their elongated necks and emaciated bodies. Some of them can barely move. Others have been driven mad by whatever was done to them, attacking with desperate, flailing violence. The experiments conducted in the research hall were based on the early belief that great ones were linked to the sea. The church scholars theorized that by filling the patients with water and having them listen for the sounds of the ocean, they might make contact with cosmic entities. Based on the patients' grotesquely enlarged heads and references to badly cut sutures on their skulls, it appears they performed trepanation, drilling holes in their victims' skulls, and then poured water into the opened cavities. The patients' heads expanded as they imbibed more and more fluid, and they were instructed to listen, to reach out with their minds to the depths of the cosmic ocean where the great ones dwelt. As you explore the research hall, you can hear the patients speaking, those few who retained enough sanity to form words. They cry out for Lady Maria, begging her to save them, to help them, to take their hands and guide them. They speak of not being able to hear anything, of being unable to make contact with the cosmos, despite all their suffering. Some pray to be released from their torment. Others have gone beyond prayer, existing only as mindless creatures that attack anything that moves. The architecture of the research hall is designed for observation and control. The spiral structure allows the church's scholars to move between levels easily, monitoring different stages of the experiments. The central pool of poison represents both the physical toxicity of the experiments and the moral poison of the church's actions. At various points you can manipulate the staircases, rotating them to create new paths, and this mechanic serves as a metaphor for the church's willingness to manipulate and reshape human beings to suit their purposes. One of the most tragic figures in the research hall is Adeline, a patient you encounter early in the area. Unlike many of the others, Adeline can still speak coherently, and she desperately seeks to become a blood saint, believing that by being filled with blood rather than water, she can finally make contact with the Great Ones. She asks you to bring her brain fluid, a grotesque substance extracted from the enlarged heads of other patients. Each time you give her this fluid, she transforms further, her own head beginning to swell as she moves closer to her goal. Adeline's quest is heartbreaking because you can see her conviction, her belief that her suffering has meaning, that she will eventually achieve contact with the divine. Lady Maria gave her the key to a balcony, hoping that fresh air and the scent of flowers might bring her some small comfort. But Adeline couldn't fathom Maria's kindness, couldn't understand why she would want anything other than to continue the experiments. The quest culminates with Adeline consuming enough brain fluid to complete her transformation into a blood saint, her head now monstrous and inhuman. After her transformation, she gives you the milkweed rune, an item that allows you to take on the form of a cosmic being yourself, her final gift before succumbing entirely to her metamorphosis. The research hall experiments were ultimately unsuccessful in their original goal of making contact with the Great Ones through listening, but the church would eventually succeed through other means. The choir, the highest echelon of the healing church, would discover the celestial emissaries, beings that had successfully ascended to become quasi-cosmic entities. They would make contact with Ebrietas, the daughter of the cosmos, a great one who became an ally to the church. But none of this would have been possible without the research hall's failures, without the countless people who were tortured and destroyed in the name of knowledge. The existence of the research hall raises profound questions about the nature of the healing church. This was not a rogue operation conducted by a few zealous scholars. This was an institutional endeavor, sanctioned and overseen by the church's leadership. The patients were not random victims. Many were likely believers who came to the church seeking healing or transcendence, who trusted that the clergy would care for them. Instead, they were subjected to experiments that were tantamount to torture, their bodies and minds destroyed in pursuit of goals they could never fully understand. Throughout the research hall, you find various items that speak to the experiments conducted there. The eye pendant, for instance, depicts eyes on the inside, the very thing that Master Willem believed was necessary for transcendence. The lead elixir, which was used to weigh down patients, perhaps to prevent them from escaping or to conduct specific experiments. The lock shield, designed to protect against all manner of non-physical damage, suggesting that the experiments sometimes produced dangerous arcane effects that even the scholars feared. The environmental storytelling in the research hall is masterful. You can see patient beds scattered throughout the area. You can find bottles of medicine and surgical implements. You can observe the different stages of transformation that the patients underwent. Some are still relatively human, only slightly mutated. Others have become so monstrous that they're barely recognizable. And at the very top of the research hall, you encounter the living failures. Patients who underwent a different kind of transformation, their bodies becoming bloated and their minds linked together in a hive consciousness. The living failures serve as a boss encounter before you can reach Lady Maria, and they represent one of the Church's experiments that might have been considered a success, or at least a partial one, depending on how you define success in the context of such horrifying research. These patients have been transformed into beings with significant cosmic power, their bodies fundamentally altered to the point where they can channel energies from beyond the stars. They can summon meteors from the sky, actual celestial objects or manifestations of cosmic force that crash down from above, calling down celestial energies to strike at intruders who threaten their sanctuary. They attack in coordinated groups, suggesting some form of shared consciousness or telepathic link, moving together in ways that speak to minds connected beyond normal human understanding. But despite these impressive and terrifying capabilities, they're also pathetic, tragic figures. They're slow-moving creatures that seem barely aware of what they've become, stumbling and shambling rather than moving with purpose or grace. Their enlarged heads bob and weave as they walk, the weight of their transformed skulls clearly difficult to manage. When they summon meteors, there's something almost childlike about their gestures, arms raised toward the sky as if in wonder or confusion, rather than with the focused intent of a true warrior or sorcerer. The name Living Failures itself is damning, a label applied by the Church scholars who viewed these transformed humans as disappointments, as attempts at transcendence that didn't quite achieve what was hoped for. These were people once, individuals with names and families and dreams, and the Church reduced them to specimens, test subjects whose worth was measured only by how well they fulfilled the researchers' goals. The most disturbing aspect of the living failures is what they represent in the broader context of the Church's experiments. These are the successes, the experiments that worked well enough to be preserved and maintained. If these pitiable creatures represent successful transformations, what horrors must the failed experiments have been like? How many people died screaming on operating tables, their bodies rejecting the procedures? How many were transformed into things so monstrous or useless that they were simply disposed of, their remains dissolved in the poisonous pools at the research hall's base? The living failures are a window into the Church's utter lack of concern for human life and dignity, their willingness to treat people as raw materials to be shaped and molded and discarded based solely on whether they produced useful results. Beyond the living failures lies the Lumenwood Garden, a beautiful outdoor space filled with strange flowering plants that seem almost impossible in this nightmarish realm. These lumen flowers possess unusual properties, only blooming when facing the Skadu tree, drawing light from its presence in ways that suggest a connection to the cosmic forces that suffuse this entire realm. The garden serves as a moment of respite before the next confrontation, a brief glimpse of beauty in this nightmare of horrors, a reminder that even in the darkest places, life can find ways to manifest and flourish. The contrast is deliberate and unsettling. You've just fought through the research hall, witnessing some of the most horrific experiments imaginable. and now you're in a garden where flowers bloom in the moonlight. And at the center of the garden, overlooking it all like a silent sentinel, stands the Astral Clocktower, where Lady Maria makes her final stand, where the caretaker of this place of suffering waits to prevent anyone from going further, from discovering what lies beyond. As you approach the Astral Clocktower, the massive clock face that dominates the research hall becomes more prominent. This clock is not simply for telling time. It serves as a mechanism for observing the stars, for charting the movements of cosmic bodies in hopes of understanding the Great Ones better. The clock is a fitting symbol for Lady Maria herself, for she is someone trapped in time, forever frozen in a moment of guilt and shame, unable to move forward or backward, only able to exist in the eternal present of the nightmare. Inside the clock tower, you find Maria sitting in an ornate chair, apparently dead. Blood pools beneath her wrists and throat, suggesting suicide. The room is beautiful, filled with fine furniture and decorations, a stark contrast to the horrors of the research hall below. When you approach Maria's body to inspect it, her hand suddenly shoots out and grasps your arm with incredible strength. She rises from the chair, very much alive, or as alive as anything can be in a nightmare, and speaks her famous line, "A corpse should be left well alone." Lady Maria of the Astral. Clocktower is one of the most compelling characters in Bloodborne. She was a student of Gehrman, the first hunter, learning the ways of combat from the man who essentially created the hunt as an institution. She came from Cainhurst Castle, related distantly to Queen Annalise, making her part of the noble vile blood lineage. But unlike her kin at Cainhurst, who revelled in blood and its forbidden powers, Maria despised the use of blood in combat. She preferred the rakuyo, a beautiful paired weapon that required skill and dexterity rather than blood manipulation. Maria's rejection of blood magic is significant given her heritage. The citizens of Cainhurst naturally possess the ability to use blood in combat, to enhance their weapons and themselves through forbidden techniques. But Maria found this distasteful, perhaps seeing it as too close to the beast's scourge, too reminiscent of the very thing hunters were supposed to fight against. Her weapon, the rakuyo, was a symbol of her principles. It was elegant, precise, and deadly, without requiring any corruption or forbidden power. Under Gehrman's tutelage, Maria became one of the first hunters, among the original warriors who went out into Gehrman's streets to combat the beast scourge. She was skilled, dedicated, and admired. Gehrman himself harbored a curious obsession with her, one that would eventually lead him to create the doll in her image. But Maria's idealism would be shattered by her participation in the Fishing Hamlet massacre. The exact details of what Maria witnessed or participated in at the Fishing Hamlet are not explicitly spelled out, but we can infer from her actions afterward. She cast away her beloved rakuyo, throwing it down a well in the hamlet, symbolically rejecting her identity as a hunter. This wasn't simply putting away a weapon. This was a rejection of everything she had been, a recognition that she could no longer stand to wield the tool of her trade after what it had been used for. After abandoning her life as a hunter, Maria took up residence in the research hall. Her role there is ambiguous. Was she complicit in the experiments, or was she trying to mitigate the suffering of the patients? The evidence suggests something between the two. The patients clearly view her with reverence, calling out to her for help and comfort. She is described as their caretaker, and she gave Adeline the key to the balcony, hoping to provide some small mercy. Yet she also lived at the top of the research hall in the Astral Clocktower, physically separated from the patients below. She protected the entrance to the Fishing Hamlet, suggesting she believed its secrets should remain buried. Maria's presence in the nightmare raises questions about the nature of death and guilt. In the waking world, Maria is dead. She took her own life, unable to continue living with what she had done and what she had witnessed. But in the hunter's nightmare, she exists as a kind of guardian, forever, protecting the path to the Fishing Hamlet. Is this truly Maria, or is it a phantom conjured by the nightmare itself? The game suggests it is Maria's actual consciousness, trapped here by Kos's curse, just like the other hunters who participated in the Hamlet massacre. When you fight Lady Maria, she embodies elegant, lethal combat. In her first phase, she uses only the Rakuyo and the Evelyn pistol, demonstrating the pure skill that made her a legendary hunter. Her movements are fluid and graceful, her attacks precise and devastating. She can transform her weapon mid-combo, switching between its paired daggers and single katana form with seamless efficiency. She can parry your attacks and respond with visceral strikes. She is everything a hunter should aspire to be: skilled, controlled, and deadly. But as the fight progresses and you deplete her health, Maria is forced to do something she swore she would never do. She plunges her blades into her own chest, coating them with her blood, enhancing them with the Canehurst techniques she had rejected. This is a moment of profound tragedy. Maria is being forced to abandon her principles, to use the very power she despised, simply to continue protecting the secret of the Fishing Hamlet. The blood enhancement transforms her Rakuyo into a weapon of devastating power, each slash leaving trails of solidified blood that can strike again after the initial hit. In the final phase of the fight, when Maria's health drops to 1/3, she takes the blood techniques even further. She adds fire to her attacks, a reference to the techniques Gehrman taught his students. The combination of blood and fire makes her attacks incredibly dangerous, able to inflict multiple damage types simultaneously. Maria becomes a whirlwind of blood-soaked steel and flames, fighting with a desperation born from her need to keep the Fishing Hamlet's secrets hidden, to ensure that her shame remains buried in the nightmare. The arena itself is beautiful, one of the most visually striking boss rooms in any From Software game. The massive clock face dominates the background, light filtering through its gears and mechanisms. The room is circular, elegant, befitting a noblewoman of Canehurst. And throughout the fight, blood splatters across the pristine floor, Maria's blood from her self-inflicted wounds and your blood from her strikes, creating an ever-growing pattern of violence on the clean surface. When you finally defeat Lady Maria, she doesn't transform into a beast or disintegrate into dust. She simply falls, as if sleeping, and is gone. There's a tragic finality to her death in the nightmare. In one interpretation, you've actually freed her, ended her eternal vigil, and allowed her soul to finally rest. Some players have reported that the doll, back in the hunter's dream, seems different after Maria's defeat, perhaps exhibiting subtle changes in demeanor or dialogue that suggest a connection between the two. This has led to speculation about a deep connection between Maria and the doll, perhaps even that Maria's soul somehow resides within or influences the doll that Gehrman created in her image. Maria's soundtrack is one of Bloodborne's most memorable pieces of music. It's melancholic and beautiful, with a haunting vocal performance in Latin. The lyrics speak of a hunter manipulated into performing terrible acts, of regret and shame, of a noble soul corrupted by the very institution she served. The music perfectly captures Maria's tragedy. She was a good person who tried to do the right thing, who tried to fight with honor and protect the innocent, but who was ultimately forced to participate in atrocities that destroyed her capacity for peace. After defeating Lady Maria in her tragic final stand, you can interact with the massive clock in her arena, using the celestial dial she drops to wind the ancient mechanism back to a specific moment in time. The clock's hands move backward, gears grinding after what might be centuries of stillness, and a doorway opens that shouldn't exist, revealing a path downward into something that exists beyond the normal flow of time and space. You descend through the clock tower's inner workings, passing through chambers filled with celestial mechanisms and astronomical instruments, leaving the research hall and all of its horrors behind. and emerge in a place that should not exist within the nightmare yet does. The Fishing Hamlet itself, the site of the original sin that started everything, preserved eternally in this cursed realm, like an insect trapped in amber, frozen at the moment of its greatest suffering. The Fishing Hamlet is unlike anywhere else in Bloodborne, visually and thematically distinct from the Gothic architecture of Gehrman and the cosmic horror of the Research Hall. It's a small coastal village, its humble wooden buildings and weathered fishing boats speaking to a simple, isolated community that existed at the margins of civilization, people who lived by the rhythms of the tide and the generosity of the sea. The sky above is dominated by a sickly yellow moon that seems too large, too present, casting an unnatural light over everything that makes the shadows deeper and the highlights too harsh. The entire area is suffused with a sense of profound wrongness, a feeling that you're walking through a place where something terrible happened and the world itself has not forgotten, cannot forget, will never forget. The first thing you encounter upon entering the hamlet is a figure that the community has simply come to call the Fishing Hamlet priest, though we never learn his actual name or what his role was before the massacre. He stands at the entrance to the village like a sentinel or guardian, and if you approach him, he speaks continuously in a voice filled with grief and rage, never stopping for breath, never pausing, never acknowledging your presence no matter what you do. His words form a litany of curses and prayers that blend together into something that transcends both categories, becoming a third thing entirely, a manifestation of pure anguish given voice. The priest's words are devastating in their simplicity and their fury. He curses the hunters, calling them fiends and blasphemers, monsters worse than any beast they claim to fight against. He mourns for Kos, crying out to the mother goddess who was defiled and murdered on the shore, whose corpse still lies in the water like a monument to human cruelty. He mourns for her orphan, the child that was torn from the womb and subjected to unspeakable violations. He speaks of the atrocities committed against the villagers in explicit, horrifying detail that makes clear this was not a clean death or a quick massacre, but a prolonged act of torture disguised as scholarship. And crucially, most importantly, he cannot be killed by any means available to you. No matter how many times you strike him down, no matter how much damage you inflict, no matter what weapons or techniques you employ, he remains standing, his body reforming, his words never ceasing, continuing his eternal condemnation of those who destroyed his world. This invulnerability is not simply a game mechanic or technical limitation, but a profound statement about the nature of the curse itself and what it represents. The priest's words, like the nightmare that contains them, are eternal and unchanging, forever proclaiming the hunter's sins to anyone who enters this place, ensuring that the truth can never be buried or forgotten, no matter how much the healing church might wish otherwise. He is the voice of the Fishing Hamlet, the witness who cannot be silenced, the testimony that cannot be dismissed or destroyed. His eternal vigil transforms him from a character into a living monument, a memorial that speaks rather than remaining silent. As you explore deeper into the Fishing Hamlet, navigating its narrow streets and collapsed buildings, you encounter its mutated inhabitants, the fishermen who still wander these streets centuries after their deaths. These creatures are no longer fully human, their bodies fundamentally transformed by prolonged exposure to Kos's cosmic power even before her death, their very cells and DNA rewritten by proximity to a being from beyond the stars. They have pronounced fish-like features, with scales covering their skin, fins growing from their backs and limbs, eyes adapted to the crushing pressures and absolute darkness of the ocean's deepest trenches. Some carry anchors as weapons, heavy iron implements that once secured boats to the seabed, now repurposed for violence, swinging them with surprising speed and devastating force, despite their obvious weight. Others have learned to channel Kos's power directly through their transformed bodies, calling down lightning strikes from the corpse of their goddess that lies on the distant shore. summoning her wrath to strike at those who dare intrude upon this sacred, cursed place. The architecture of the village tells its own story to those who take the time to read it carefully. These are humble structures, built by people who made their living from the sea and had neither the wealth for grandeur nor the ambition for it. The buildings are functional, designed to withstand coastal storms and saltwater corrosion, with low roofs and sturdy foundations. There are fishing nets draped over rails to dry, boats pulled up onto the shore in various states of repair, barrels that once held salted fish or drinking water, equipment for mending nets and sharpening hooks. These are the implements of an honest, hard-working community that asked for nothing from the outside world except to be left in peace. But there are also signs everywhere of the massacre that took place here, evidence that cannot be missed or ignored. Buildings are damaged, their walls marked by burns and blade strikes, and the distinctive scoring patterns left by certain Bergenwerth weapons. You can find bodies scattered throughout the area, mummified or skeletal remains of villagers who were slaughtered by the hunters and scholars, left where they fell because the murderers saw no reason to provide proper burial rites to people they viewed as little better than experimental subjects. And everywhere you look, absolutely everywhere, there are parasites, those strange tentacled creatures that lived within Kos's body, and that the villagers harvested for various purposes in their daily lives. The parasites seem to be some kind of symbiotic organism that existed in relationship with Kos, possibly serving functions similar to bacteria in a human digestive system, or perhaps something more complex and unknowable. The villagers used them for fuel to light their lamps, allowing these creatures to serve as a renewable source of illumination in a community that probably couldn't afford whale oil or other conventional fuels. They may have used them for food, consuming the parasites in ways we can only imagine, possibly dried or salted or prepared through methods lost to time. They might have used them medicinally, recognizing properties in the creatures that could heal or ease pain or prevent disease. The parasites represent the villagers' deep integration with Kos, their dependence on her even in death, the way their entire way of life had become intertwined with the Great One, who had blessed them with her presence. The ship masts rising from the ocean in the distance are particularly striking and mysterious. These massive wooden structures that jut up from the water at impossible angles that defy normal maritime architecture. These masts reach toward the sickly yellow sky like accusing fingers, like monuments to disaster. They suggest shipwrecks, vessels that foundered on these rocky shores during storms, but their placement and angles suggest something more deliberate, more intentional. Some theories among the Bloodborne community suggest these masts are actually visible from the Nightmare of Mensis, the other major nightmare realm accessible in the base game, implying that the Fishing Hamlet exists at the very bottom of a layered nightmare structure that extends through multiple dimensions of reality and unreality. Under this interpretation, the hamlet represents the foundation upon which all other nightmares are built, the original sin from which all subsequent horrors flow, the bedrock of guilt and suffering that supports the entire edifice of Gehrman's cursed history. In the village, you'll find the Rakuyo at the bottom of a well, a location heavy with symbolic meaning, guarded by two massive shark giants who are among the most formidable and aggressive enemies in the entire game. These creatures are nightmarish combinations of human and aquatic life, their bodies massive and powerful, their attacks unpredictable and devastating. That Maria's beloved weapon rests here in this terrible place, protected by such dangerous guardians, speaks volumes about how completely she wanted to reject her identity after witnessing and participating in the massacre. She didn't simply put the Rakuyo away in storage or hide it in a forgotten corner. She cast it into the depths of a well in the accursed village itself, throwing it down where she hoped it would never be found, hoping perhaps that it would be lost forever in the darkness, that her connection to the hunt could be severed by abandoning the tool that had defined her for so long. The act of retrieving it requires you to face genuine danger, to fight through enemies that can easily kill even experienced hunters, suggesting that Maria wanted to make absolutely certain that anyone seeking her weapon would have to prove themselves worthy or die trying. As you progress through the Fishing Hamlet, navigating its twisted geography and fighting through its corrupted inhabitants, you're invaded multiple times by Brador the Church Assassin, whose presence becomes an increasingly ominous recurring threat. Brador is a hunter who has been imprisoned in a cell back in the earlier sections of the nightmare, his physical body locked away in darkness, but his spirit can manifest as a hostile phantom to hunt down and kill those who get too close to discovering the healing church's deepest secrets. Each time he invades, materializing from thin air with his distinctive beast-hide armor and bloodletter weapon, he attacks with single-minded viciousness, using fighting techniques that speak to decades of experience and training. His fighting style is brutal and efficient, incorporating charged attacks that can drain most of your health in a single hit if you're not careful. Each time he successfully invades, whether he kills you or you kill him, he can drop a vermin, the item associated with the League Covenant, suggesting that Brador sees his victims not as innocent explorers, but as corruption that must be crushed, as threats to an order that must be preserved at any cost. Brador's story, when you piece it together from item descriptions and environmental clues, is itself a profound tragedy that mirrors many of the themes explored throughout the DLC. He was once a loyal hunter who had a close companion, possibly a friend, or perhaps even a brother in arms, someone he fought alongside and trusted implicitly. But this companion eventually succumbed to the beast scourge, transforming into one of the very monsters they had dedicated their lives to fighting. Brador was forced to kill his friend personally, to end his suffering and prevent further harm, an act that would have been traumatic under any circumstances, but was especially devastating given their close relationship. This mercy killing drove Brador to the edge of madness, shattering something fundamental in his psyche, and the healing church, recognizing his unstable state and seeing an opportunity, imprisoned him in a dark cell. But rather than simply locking him away and forgetting about him, they used him as a tool, keeping him alive and exploiting his phantom form to hunt anyone who ventured too close to discovering the truth about the Fishing Hamlet. Brador believed, or perhaps convinced himself to believe, that he was serving a noble purpose, that he was protecting the church and preserving order, that his suffering had meaning and his imprisonment was justified. But he was really just another victim in a long line of victims, kept in a cell and weaponized by an institution that cared nothing for his pain or trauma, that saw him merely as a useful asset to be deployed when needed. At the edge of the village, you can see Kos herself. Her massive corpse lies partially submerged in the shallow waters of the beach, her body a grotesque fusion of aquatic features and something that might once have been humanoid. Parasites crawl across her dead flesh. Her face, what you can see of it, suggests suffering. And most significantly, from her body emerges a black shadow, a phantasmal form that seems to be giving birth even in death. This is the Orphan of Kos, the Great One's child that was torn from her during the massacre, that was likely dissected and experimented upon by the Bergenwerth scholars. The orphan that emerges from Kos's corpse is not a physical being, but a phantasmal manifestation, the child's spirit given form by the nightmare itself. It stands at the water's edge, looking up at the moon, and its cries are heartbreaking. Some have noted that the orphan's cries are actually a distorted version of Gehrman's own crying, the sounds the first hunter makes when he weeps in the hunter's dream, suggesting a deep connection between Gehrman's guilt and the orphan's suffering. When you approach the orphan, it initially ignores you, too absorbed in its mourning to notice your presence. But once you get close enough, or attack it, the orphan turns its attention to you, and the fight begins. This is the final boss of the Old Hunters DLC, the culmination of everything you've learned about the curse and the nightmare, and it is one of the most intense battles in any From Software game. The orphan fights with its own placenta, wielding the afterbirth as a weapon, using it like a club or flail. This grotesque choice of weapon is profoundly meaningful. The placenta is what nourished the orphan in the womb, what connected it to its mother. Now that connection has been severed, and the orphan uses it as a tool of violence, striking out at the hunters who robbed it of life before it could even begin. The orphan can tear pieces from the placenta and hurl them as explosive projectiles, each one detonating with cosmic energy. In its first phase, the orphan is fast and aggressive, but relatively grounded. It runs at you on all fours, leaps through the air to strike from above, swings its weapon in wild but purposeful patterns. Its movements are erratic, almost childlike, as if it's learning to fight even as the battle progresses. This makes sense given that the orphan never truly lived. It exists only as a spirit born from the nightmare, and everything it knows about violence and combat is instinctive rather than learned. But when you reduce the orphan's health to roughly half, something changes. The orphan begins to scream, a piercing cry that seems to shake the very fabric of the nightmare. It rises into the air, and wings manifest on its back, growing from the thin membrane that was draped across its shoulders. The placenta weapon transforms, becoming more defined, taking on the shape of a massive scythe or glaive. And most dramatically, the orphan begins calling down lightning strikes from Kos's corpse. The second phase of the orphan fight is pure chaos. The orphan moves with blinding speed, teleporting across the arena, leaping impossible distances, striking from every angle. The lightning it summons creates zones of death that you must navigate, while also dodging the orphan's relentless assault. The shallow water you're fighting in suddenly becomes a hazard as electricity courses through it. And through it all, the orphan continues to scream, its cries mixing with the dramatic musical score to create an atmosphere of desperate, tragic violence. What makes the Orphan of Kos such a powerful encounter is not just its difficulty, but what it represents. This is not an evil creature. The orphan is a victim, a child that was never allowed to be born, that was killed and violated before it could even open its eyes. Its rage is completely justified. Its violence is understandable. When the orphan attacks you, it's not attacking a specific person. It's attacking every hunter, every scholar, everyone who participated in the massacre, everyone who comes after them carrying on their legacy of violence and bloodlust. The arena itself is significant. You're fighting at the edge of the ocean, where Kos's body lies. The beach represents the boundary between the human world and the cosmic depths, between understanding and the unknowable. The battle takes place in that liminal space, and both you and the orphan are creatures of two worlds. You are a hunter, but also something more, touched by the nightmare and the dream. The orphan is a great one, but also something less, robbed of its chance to fully exist. When you finally defeat the orphan, its body collapses into the shallow water, lifeless. But the fight is not truly over. A black shadow rises from Kos's corpse, the true spirit of the orphan, and begins to drift back toward the ocean. You must strike this shadow to dispel it, to send it back to the sea and the cosmic depths from which Kos came. When you do so, the nightmare itself begins to change. The screen displays "Nightmare Slain," the same message you see when defeating other nightmare-hosting great ones like Murgo's wet nurse. The death of the orphan and the dispersal of its spirit represents the ending of Kos's curse. Without the orphan binding the nightmare together, the hunter's nightmare begins to lose its cohesion. The hunters trapped there are finally granted rest. Back in the hunter's dream, if you speak to the doll, she mentions that Gehrman is sleeping soundly now, no longer troubled by nightmares. The curse has been lifted, not just for those in the nightmare, but for all hunters, past and present, who were touched by the sins of the Fishing Hamlet. There's something deeply sad about the orphan's defeat. You've ended the curse, yes, and freed countless souls from eternal torment. But you've also killed a child, a being that was already a victim long before you ever encountered it. The orphan was born only to suffer, only to serve as the focal point of a curse born from atrocity. Its entire existence was defined by loss and pain. And now, finally, you've ended that existence, allowing the orphan to return to the cosmic ocean from which it came, to be reunited with its mother in whatever afterlife awaits great ones. While the Orphan of Kos serves as the climactic finale of the Old Hunters DLC, there is one more boss to face, an optional encounter that provides crucial context for Bloodborne's overall narrative. This is Laurence, the First Vicar, the man who founded the Healing Church and who bears responsibility for much of what went wrong in Gehrman. To fight Laurence, you must first acquire his skull during your journey through the nightmare. The skull is found in the research hall, hidden beneath the original altar that serves as an elevator. This is not Laurence's actual skull, which rests in the grand cathedral in the waking world, split down the middle from temple to chin. Rather, this is Laurence's skull, as it existed before his transformation, a symbol of his humanity, something he failed to protect according to the item description. When you bring Laurence's skull back to the Grand Cathedral in the Hunter's Nightmare, you find his beastly form resting on an altar in the center of the church. The setting is identical to where you fought Vicar Amelia in the main game, and this parallel is deliberate. Amelia was transforming into a beast when you fought her, still desperately clinging to her humanity, praying to Laurence's skull for guidance. Now you face Laurence himself, fully transformed, showing the fate that awaited Amelia and all who follow the path he established. Laurence's beast form resembles the cleric beast, the first boss of the main game, but it is wreathed in flame. His entire body burns with an unquenchable fire, and this fire is part of his attacks, making every strike not just physically devastating, but also inflicting burn damage. The flames are not normal fire. They're supernatural, cosmic, speaking to Laurence's deep connection with the eldritch forces he sought to control and understand. The fight against Laurence is brutal. In his first phase, he uses attacks similar to the cleric beast, but enhanced with fire. He can rear up and slam down with crushing force, creating explosions of flame on impact. He can swipe with his massive clawed hands, each hit leaving trails of fire. He can vomit flame across the arena, creating zones that linger and burn. And his movements are faster and more aggressive than the cleric beasts, showing that even in his monstrous form, Laurence retains some vestige of intelligence and purpose. But it's Laurence's second phase that truly sets him apart. When his health drops to roughly 40%, something horrific happens. His lower body can no longer support his weight, and his legs literally explode from the strain. Laurence becomes a torso with arms, dragging himself across the arena like a grotesque mockery of humanity. And as he drags himself, he leaves trails of lava behind, his body constantly bleeding molten flame. This phase is one of the most challenging in all of Bloodborne. Laurence becomes incredibly aggressive, pulling himself forward with powerful strikes that cover huge distances. Every impact creates pools of lava that persist on the battlefield. He can spew fire from his mouth, creating even more hazardous terrain. The arena becomes progressively more dangerous as the fight continues, the fire accumulating until there are fewer and fewer safe spaces to stand. The imagery of Laurence's second phase is profoundly meaningful. This is the founder of the Healing Church, the man who brought blood healing to Gehrman, who established the institution that would define the city's culture and character. And now he's reduced to a beast that can't even walk, that drags itself on its hands while bleeding fire, consuming everything around it in its desperation. This is what Laurence's legacy became. An unquenchable flame that destroys indiscriminately, that can't be stopped or controlled, that burns away everything, including the one who created it. Laurence's story begins at Bürgenwerth, where he studied under Master Willem. Willem was obsessed with transcending humanity, with gaining insight and evolving beyond the limitations of human existence. He believed the way to do this was through gaining eyes on the inside, through understanding the great ones on their own level. But his approach was cautious, intellectual, focused on gaining knowledge rather than power. Laurence disagreed with this approach. When the Bürgenwerth scholars discovered the old blood in the chalice dungeons beneath Gehrman, Laurence saw not just a subject of study, but a tool that could be used immediately. The old blood had healing properties, could cure diseases, could extend life. Laurence believed that by administering this blood to people, they could accelerate human evolution, bring about transcendence not through patient study, but through direct intervention. Willem warned Laurence against this path. The famous line, "Fear the old blood," was Willem's final advice to his student as Laurence prepared to leave Bürgenwerth. Laurence promised he would remember this warning, that he would never forget to fear the blood, even as he used it. But it was a hollow promise. Laurence left Bürgenwerth along with other scholars, including Gehrman and Michelash, and they traveled to Gehrman, where they would establish the Healing Church. The Healing Church presented itself as a benevolent institution. It distributed blood healing freely to the people of Gehrman, curing diseases that had plagued the city for generations. It established schools and hospitals. It created the workshop and recruited hunters to protect civilians from the beast's scourge. On the surface, everything Laurence built seemed good and righteous. But beneath that surface, the church was conducting experiments, seeking forbidden knowledge, and slowly corrupting everyone involved. Laurence's fate was inevitable from the moment he chose to use the old blood, despite Willem's warnings. He transformed into a cleric beast, quite possibly the first member of the church's clergy to succumb fully to the scourge in this particular way, given his position as first vicar and pioneer of blood ministration. The transformation must have been agonizing, the realization that everything he built was founded on a poison that would eventually consume him and everyone he touched. When he died as a beast, his skull was retrieved and placed on the altar in the Grand Cathedral, becoming an object of veneration, even as it served as a warning of what could happen to any who strayed from proper wisdom. In the nightmare, Laurence is trapped, just like Ludwig and Maria, and all the other hunters, who either participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, or who became blood-drunk in the years that followed. Whether Laurence's presence stems from involvement in the original sin, or simply from his transformation into a beast, remains unclear, but his burning form sits on an altar, motionless, until someone brings him his human skull, the symbol of what he lost. When presented with this reminder of his humanity, Laurence rises and attacks, as if the reminder of what he once was is too painful to bear. Defeating Laurence grants you the Beast's Embrace rune, an item that allows you to take on beast-like qualities yourself, embracing the very transformation that Laurence fell victim to. It's a dark reward, suggesting that the cycle continues, that the temptation to embrace the beast is always present, always waiting for the next person who believes they can control what cannot be controlled. The Old Hunters. DLC introduces 16 new weapons, each with its own history and significance. These weapons are not simply gameplay additions, they're archaeological artifacts, each one telling a story about the hunters who wielded them and the evolution of the hunt itself. The Beast Cutter is one of the first weapons you'll encounter, located near the entrance to the Hunter's Nightmare. It's a massive cleaver that transforms into a segmented whip, allowing for incredible reach. The weapon was particularly favored by the Powder Kegs, a group of hunters who believed in using any means necessary to slay beasts. The Powder Kegs were known for their excessive methods, their willingness to use explosives and fire, and anything else that would get the job done, even if it meant collateral damage. The boom hammer embodies the Powder Keg's philosophy perfectly. It's a weapon that incorporates a small furnace into its design, igniting upon each strike to create devastating explosions. When you swing the boom hammer, you're not just hitting an enemy with a heavy object. You're detonating a controlled explosion in their face. The weapon is crude, brutal, and incredibly effective, perfect for hunters who prioritized results over elegance. The whirligig saw is perhaps the most infamous of the powder keg's creations. In its default form, it's a heavy mace, already a devastating weapon. But when transformed, it activates a series of circular saw blades that rotate at high speed, literally shredding anything they touch. The weapon's description calls it a workshop masterpiece, and notes that it was especially effective against kin, suggesting it was used to combat the celestial emissaries and other cosmic beings that the healing church encountered. The Beast Hunter Saif represents a different philosophy of hunting. This curved sword transforms between a compact cleaver and an extended blade, and its attacks include built-in dashes that propel the wielder forward or backward, depending on which form is active. The Saif emphasizes mobility and positioning, allowing hunters to flow in and out of combat range with fluid grace. It was associated with hunters who valued speed and skill, who saw combat as a dance rather than a brawl. The church pick is a weapon that looks like a simple stake in its default form, but transforms into a wicked spear with a pick-like head. What makes the church pick special is that all of its attacks deal thrust damage, which is particularly effective against kin and great ones. The weapon was designed specifically for hunting cosmic beings, recognizing that the church would need to combat not just beasts, but also the eldritch horrors that lurked in Gehrman's shadows. The description notes that the church's hunters eventually became the very thing they hunted, a fate that befell many in the old hunters. The Kos parasite is perhaps the strangest weapon in all of Bloodborne. In its default state, it's completely useless, just a writhing mass of tentacles that deals almost no damage. But when equipped alongside the milkweed rune, it transforms the user into a cosmic being, a creature covered in writhing tentacles that can channel eldritch energies. The weapon represents the ultimate fate of those who delve too deep into cosmic secrets, transformation into something utterly alien, no longer human in any meaningful sense. The Rakuyo is Lady Maria's weapon, and it's a testament to her skill and her rejection of blood magic. The weapon consists of paired blades that can be wielded together or separated into a katana and dagger. Every attack flows seamlessly into the next, creating an elegant combat style that requires significant dexterity and timing. Maria's use of the Rakuyo shows that it's possible to be a legendary hunter without relying on the forbidden powers that corrupted so many others. The weapon's presence at the bottom of a well in the Fishing Hamlet, guarded by two massive shark giants, speaks to how desperately Maria wanted to separate herself from her identity as a hunter. The Holy Moonlight Sword is Ludwig's legendary blade, the weapon that guided him through his darkest moments. It's a massive greatsword that can channel arcane energy, creating waves of cosmic power with each swing. When two-handed, the sword can unleash explosive beams of light that strike at range. The weapon is unique in Bloodborne for being obviously magical, glowing with ethereal energy, channeling the abyssal cosmos itself. Ludwig believed this sword was his guiding light, literally showing him the path forward, and in the nightmare, seeing the sword again allows him to briefly regain his humanity. Simon's bow blade is a hybrid weapon that functions as both a curved sword and a bow. Simon, the Harrowed, despised firearms, viewing them as crude and inelegant. So the church workshop created this specialized weapon for him, allowing him to engage enemies at range without using a gun. Other hunters mocked Simon for using a bow against beasts, believing it was ineffective. But Simon proved them wrong, becoming a legendary hunter in his own right. The weapon represents the diversity of approaches that hunters could take, that there wasn't just one correct way to fight. The Bloodletter is a mace that transforms into a massive spiked club, but the transformation comes at a cost. The weapon consumes the user's health, coating itself in blood to enhance its power. The bloodletter is wielded by Brador, the Church Assassin, and it represents the ultimate fusion of violence and sacrifice. To use the weapon effectively, you must harm yourself, must be willing to bleed to make your strikes more powerful. It's a fitting weapon for someone who has lost everything, who sees pain as the price that must be paid for duty. The amygdalan arm is one of the most bizarre weapons in the game. It's literally the severed arm of an amygdala, one of those cosmic beings that hang from buildings throughout Gehrman. In its default form, it's a club-like weapon, but when transformed, it extends into a writhing, pulsating appendage that has a life of its own. The weapon quivers and twists with each swing, as if still alive, as if the amygdala's consciousness persists within its severed limb. Using this weapon means wielding cosmic flesh against its original owners. The firearms introduced in the DLC are equally significant. The piercing rifle is a long-range weapon favored by sniper hunters who preferred to engage beasts from a distance. The Gatling gun is an absurdly excessive weapon that can fire a continuous stream of bullets, embodying the powder keg's belief in overwhelming firepower. The church cannon is a heavy artillery piece that fires explosive shells, capable of destroying entire groups of enemies, but requiring careful aim and timing. The Fist of Gratia is a simple brass knuckle that exists purely for devastating charged punches. And the Lock Shield is unique as one of only 2 shields in Bloodborne, designed to protect against all forms of non-physical damage. Each of these weapons represents a different approach to the hunt, a different philosophy about how to combat the beast's scourge. Together, they form a comprehensive picture of how the hunt evolved over time, from Gehrman's elegant, skill-based techniques to Ludwig's powerful, accessible weapons to the powder keg's excessive, destructive methods. They show us that the hunt was not a monolithic institution, but a diverse collection of different hunters with different beliefs, all united by the common goal of protecting humanity from the beasts. Simon the Harrowed is your primary guide through the hunter's nightmare, an NPC who provides crucial context and commentary as you journey deeper into the cursed realm. Unlike many NPCs in From Software games, Simon actively helps you, guiding you toward the secrets of the nightmare and explaining what you're witnessing. His motivation is clear. He wants to end the curse, not just for himself, but for all hunters trapped in the nightmare's eternal hunt. You first encounter Simon at a shortcut passage near the first lamp in the hunter's nightmare. He recognizes immediately that you're different from the blood-drunk hunters who wander the nightmare aimlessly. You still have your sanity, your purpose. He warns you about the nature of the nightmare, explaining that this is where hunters end up when they become intoxicated with blood, when they lose themselves to the violence of the hunt. His words are weary, spoken by someone who has seen too much horror and knows that more waits ahead. Simon's attire, the Harrowed set, provides insight into his past. He was one of the Harrowed, a division of church hunters who disguised themselves as beggars to move through Gehrman unnoticed. The Harrowed's role was to watch for early signs of the beast's scourge, to identify threats before they could escalate. This required stealth and patience, qualities that Simon clearly possessed. His blindfolded hood, which covers the upper half of his face, suggests he has seen things he wishes he could unsee, horrors that haunt him even with his eyes closed. Simon's signature weapon, the bow blade, marks him as unusual among hunters. In a culture that increasingly relied on firearms for ranged combat, Simon rejected guns entirely. He had the church workshop create a specialized weapon just for him, one that could transform from a curved sword into a bow. Other hunters mocked this choice, believing that bows were ineffective against powerful beasts. But Simon proved them wrong, becoming skilled enough with the weapon to earn a legendary reputation. When you meet Simon again at the entrance to the research hall, his commentary becomes more pointed. He directs your attention to the true face of the blood-worshipping, beast-purging, healing church, the experiments and horrors visible within the research hall. He tells you that if you want to uncover the secrets held by the nightmare, you must kill Lady Maria and go beyond her to find what lies hidden. His words are bitter, full of contempt for the church that he once served. Simon's questline progresses if you choose the right dialogue options when speaking to him. If you tell him that you find nightmares fascinating, that you're interested in uncovering secrets, he'll approve and continue to help you. But if you express disinterest, he accepts your decision and tells you to simply hunt beasts and think no more about the secrets of the night, that this is the best thing a hunter can do. It's a revealing statement. Simon knows that seeking the truth comes at a cost, that uncovering the nightmare's secrets requires confronting terrible truths about the healing church and the hunt itself. The final time you encounter Simon, he's at the lighthouse hut in the Fishing Hamlet, mortally wounded. Brador, the Church Assassin, has hunted him down and inflicted fatal injuries. Simon knows he's dying, and his last act is to help you. He gives you his bow blade and the underground cell inner chamber key, the tool needed to reach Brador's cell and end his phantom invasions permanently. Even in death, Simon is focused on helping someone else succeed where he failed, on ensuring the curse can be ended. Simon's dying words are full of contempt for the unfair fate of hunters. He speaks of how they were drawn into the nightmare because of misdeeds they may not have even committed personally, trapped by a curse born from sins of the past. There's a profound sense of injustice in his voice. The hunters in the nightmare aren't necessarily bad people. Many, like Simon himself, were trying to protect Gehrman, to fight beasts and save lives. But they became collateral damage in a curse born from the actions of others, condemned to eternal hunting because of what Bergenworth scholars and old hunters did at the Fishing Hamlet. What makes Simon compelling is his self-awareness. He knows he's trapped in the nightmare. He knows the curse is unjust. But rather than succumbing to despair or bloodlust like so many others, he retains his sanity and uses whatever agency he has left to try to help end the curse. He guides you toward the Fishing Hamlet because he understands that's where it all began, that the only way to end the nightmare is to confront its source. Even knowing it will likely cost him his life, he persists in pursuing the truth. Simon also serves as a voice of reason and context throughout the DLC. His observations help players understand what they're seeing, provide lore context for the environments and enemies. Without Simon, much of the DLC would be even more opaque and mysterious than it already is. He's the NPC who helps bridge the gap between gameplay and narrative, who makes the connections explicit that might otherwise remain hidden. After Simon dies, you can find his entire Harrowed set in a hut near the lighthouse in the Fishing Hamlet. The location is fitting, close to where he fell, a memorial to a hunter who died trying to do the right thing. His equipment becomes a reminder of his sacrifice, of a person who refused to give up his humanity, even trapped in a nightmare designed to strip it away. Brador, the Church Assassin, represents the healing church's willingness to do anything to protect its secrets. While the research hall showed the church's commitment to forbidden experiments, Brador demonstrates their commitment to silencing anyone who might expose those experiments. He is a dark mirror to Simon, another hunter trapped in the nightmare, but one who has fully embraced his role as the church's weapon. You first encounter Brador as an invading phantom in the hunter's nightmare. His appearance is intimidating. He wears thick beast-hide armor that covers his entire body, making him look more like a beast than a human. He wields the Bloodletter, a weapon that requires its user to sacrifice their own health to enhance its power. And he's relentless, pursuing you through the nightmare with single-minded determination. What makes Brador unique is that killing him as a phantom doesn't stop him. he'll simply invade again later, respawning to continue his hunt. This immortality mirrors that of blood-drunk hunters trapped in the nightmare, but Brador's invasions are purposeful rather than mindless. He's actively trying to stop you from reaching the Fishing Hamlet, from uncovering the secrets that the church wants to keep buried. Each time he invades, he can drop a vermin, the item associated with the League Covenant, suggesting that Brador sees his victims as corruption that must be crushed. Brador invades multiple times as you progress through the DLC if you don't find and eliminate his physical body. His invasions occur at specific points in the Fishing Hamlet area, and his persistence is both impressive and disturbing. Even after being defeated repeatedly, he continues to pursue you, never learning, never stopping, forever fulfilling his role as the church's guardian. To permanently end Brador's invasions, you must acquire the underground cell inner chamber key from Simon and use it to access Brador's physical body. His cell is located between Ludwig's arena and the research hall, hidden in a dark tunnel. When you open the cell, you find Brador sitting inside, alive, conscious, and immediately hostile. Unlike his phantom form, the real Brador can be parried and visceral attacked, making the fight significantly more manageable. Killing Brador in his cell doesn't just stop his invasions, it allows you to loot his beast-hide armor set and the bloodletter weapon. The armor's description provides crucial context for Brador's story. He once had a companion, another hunter he cared about deeply. This companion succumbed to the beast scourge, transforming before Brador's eyes, and Brador was forced to kill his friend, to put down someone he loved because they had become a monster. This traumatic experience broke something in Brador. He became unstable, dangerous, consumed by guilt and rage. The healing church, rather than helping him, saw an opportunity. They imprisoned him, but kept him alive, using him as a weapon to kill anyone who got too close to the Fishing Hamlet. They told him he was serving a noble purpose, protecting the church and maintaining order. But really, they were just using a broken man as a tool, exploiting his trauma and his desire to serve. Brador's armor is described as being cut from a beast, suggesting he literally wears the skin of the creatures he once hunted. This adds another layer of tragedy to his story. He's so consumed by his experiences fighting beasts that he's covered himself in their flesh, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as penance, perhaps as a way to become closer to the thing that destroyed his companion. The bloodletter weapon Brador wields is perfect for him thematically. It's a weapon that requires self-harm to reach its full power, that demands the user sacrifice their own blood to enhance their strikes. For someone consumed by guilt and self-loathing, for someone who believes they deserve to suffer, the bloodletter is an ideal tool. Every swing is an act of penance, a physical manifestation of the pain that Brador carries within him. What makes Brador's story particularly sad is that he's a victim twice over. First, he was victimized by the beast scourge when it took his companion. Then he was victimized by the healing church, which imprisoned him and weaponized his trauma. He could have been helped, could have been given the support needed to process his grief and guilt. Instead, he was locked in a cell and used as a guard dog, set loose on anyone who threatened the church's secrets. Brador's persistence in hunting you even after multiple defeats speaks to his complete indoctrination. He genuinely believes he's doing the right thing, that protecting the church's secrets is worth any cost. He doesn't question whether the secrets should be exposed, whether the church deserves to have its crimes revealed. He simply obeys, fulfilling his role as an assassin even in death, even trapped in a nightmare, forever loyal to an institution that used him and threw him away. The Old Hunters DLC doesn't exist in isolation from the main game. Rather, it provides crucial context and backstory for characters and events in the base Bloodborne experience. Understanding these connections helps create a complete picture of Gehrman's history and the curse that plagues it. Gehrman, the first hunter, is perhaps the most important figure connecting the DLC to the main game. Throughout the base game, Gehrman remains in the hunter's dream, confined to his wheelchair, sleeping or tending to weapons, and occasionally offering cryptic advice. He seems weary, trapped, tormented by something in his past. The DLC reveals what haunts him: his participation in the Fishing Hamlet massacre. Gehrman was there when the Byrgenwerth scholars slaughtered the villagers. He witnessed the atrocities committed against Kos and her unborn child. He trained Maria, the woman he became obsessed with, and then watched as the Fishing Hamlet broke something fundamental in her soul. When you defeat the Orphan of Kos and lift the curse, the doll mentions that Gehrman is finally sleeping peacefully, no longer restless, suggesting that he's been tormented by guilt over the Fishing Hamlet for years. The doll herself is deeply connected to Lady Maria. Gehrman created the doll in Maria's image after her death, obsessed with preserving some version of the woman he admired but could never truly have. The doll's appearance, voice, and mannerisms are all modeled after Maria. But crucially, the doll lacks Maria's personality, her lived experiences, her pain and guilt. The doll is an idealized version, innocent where Maria was burdened, content where Maria was tormented. When you defeat Lady Maria in the nightmare, some players have observed that the doll back in the hunter's dream seems different, suggesting a possible connection between Maria's consciousness trapped in the nightmare and the doll's existence. The exact nature of this connection remains mysterious, but it speaks to the depth of Gehrman's feelings for Maria and the tragedy of what became of both of them. Master Willem, the founder of Byrgenwerth, is the architect of much of what goes wrong in Bloodborne. His obsession with transcending humanity through gaining insight led to the expedition to the Fishing Hamlet. His students, including Laurence and Mikolash, all took his teachings and twisted them in various ways. Willem himself remains at Byrgenwerth throughout the main game, blind and silent, sitting in his chair and looking out over the lake that conceals Rom, the vacuous spider. Willem's blindness is significant. He believed that gaining eyes on the inside was necessary for transcendence. But physically blinding oneself was also part of this philosophy, forcing one to rely on internal sight rather than external perception. Willem may have blinded himself deliberately, or he may have lost his sight through age and infirmity. Either way, his condition serves as a metaphor for his approach to knowledge. He sought to see beyond human perception, but ended up isolated and unable to perceive the consequences of his actions. The orphanage in the main game, located in the Upper Cathedral Ward, takes on new meaning after playing the DLC. This is where the healing church gathered celestial children, beings who had been transformed through experiments similar to those conducted in the research hall. The presence of Ebrietas, the daughter of the cosmos, in the orphanage's lowest level, suggests that the church had succeeded in making contact with at least one great one. But this success came at the cost of countless human lives, countless experiments that failed, countless people transformed into cosmic beings that barely retained any humanity. The ashen blood plague that consumed Old Gehrman is referenced in the Hunter's Nightmare, which is set during or shortly after that outbreak. The DLC confirms that the powder kegs and other old hunters participated in the scouring of Old Gehrman, the burning of the district to contain the plague. This explains Jura's guilt in the main game, why he stands watch over Old Gehrman and tries to prevent other hunters from entering. He participated in the massacre, killed countless innocents alongside the infected, and now he's dedicated his remaining life to protecting what remains. The choir, the healing church's highest echelon, is never directly shown in the DLC, but their work is everywhere. The research hall experiments that sought to make contact with Great Ones through listening eventually succeeded, culminating in the choir's discovery of Ebrietas. The celestial emissaries, those small alien beings found throughout the game, are the result of successful transformations, people who actually achieved a kind of transcendence by becoming cosmic entities. But the choir's success doesn't excuse the countless failures, the patients who died in agony or became monsters. The moon presence, the great one that created the hunter's dream and keeps Gehrman trapped there, may have been beckoned by Laurence according to notes found in the main game. If true, this means Laurence was responsible not just for the healing church and the spread of blood healing, but also for binding Gehrman to eternal servitude. The moon presence used Gehrman's skills and knowledge to create an army of immortal hunters who could die repeatedly and still return to fight. This was ostensibly to combat the beast scourge, but it also ensured that hunters would never truly rest, never escape the hunt. The blood healing that defines Gehrman's culture and the church's power is revealed in the DLC to have come from the old blood discovered in the Chalice dungeons. The Pthumerians, an ancient civilization that dwelt beneath Gehrman, had access to this blood and used it for their own purposes. When Byrgenwerth scholars excavated the dungeons, they found the old blood and recognized its potential. But they also recognized its danger, which is why Willem warned against using it. Laurence ignored that warning, and the result was the beast scourge that plagues Gehrman. The DLC also provides context for many weapons and items found in the main game. Ludwig's Holy Blade, one of the most popular weapons in Bloodborne, is revealed to be a replica of the Holy Moonlight Sword, created by the Church Workshop based on Ludwig's legendary weapon. The church pick and other righteous weapons are shown to have been designed specifically for hunting kin and great ones, suggesting the church was preparing to fight cosmic beings from its very beginning. The various cleric beasts found throughout the game are all following in Laurence's footsteps, church clergy who succumbed to the scourge. The Old Hunters expansion is fundamentally about consequences and guilt. Every major character in the DLC is defined by past actions that they cannot escape or undo. Ludwig created weapons and methods that democratized the hunt, but also led to countless hunters becoming blood-drunk and transforming into beasts. Lady Maria participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre and could never forgive herself, ultimately taking her own life and still finding no peace. Laurence founded the Healing Church and brought blood healing to Gehrman, but also created the conditions that would lead to the beast scourge. Gehrman trained the first hunters and participated in terrible atrocities, earning a curse that would haunt him for eternity. The theme of sins echoing through time pervades every aspect of the DLC. The nightmare exists because of what happened at the Fishing Hamlet, an event that took place long before the main game's story begins. But the curse didn't just affect those who participated directly. It spread to subsequent generations of hunters, claiming anyone who became too drunk with blood, too lost in the violence of the hunt. The sins of the past continue to claim victims in the present, creating a cycle of violence and suffering that seems unbreakable. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge is another central theme. The Byrgenwerth scholars went to the Fishing Hamlet seeking eyes on the inside, seeking to understand the Great Ones and achieve transcendence. The Healing Church continued this pursuit through the research hall experiments, transforming people into cosmic beings in hopes of making contact with higher forms of existence. But this knowledge came at a terrible cost, paid not by those seeking it, but by innocent victims who were experimented upon, mutated, and destroyed. The DLC also explores the concept of what it means to be human versus beast. Almost every major figure in the expansion has struggled with this boundary. Ludwig became a beast, but retained some vestige of humanity when he saw the Holy Moonlight Sword. Maria used blood magic she despised to protect secrets, compromising her principles in service to what she believed was a greater good. The patients in the research hall were deliberately pushed beyond humanity, transformed into beings that could barely be recognized as what they once were. And the hunters themselves walk a razor's edge, constantly in danger of losing their humanity to bloodlust. The relationship between the individual and the institution is examined throughout the DLC. The Healing Church presents itself as benevolent, as an organization dedicated to healing and protecting Gehrman. But beneath that facade lies ruthless experimentation, murder of innocents, and a willingness to sacrifice anyone in pursuit of transcendence. Individual hunters and clergy might have noble intentions, but the institution itself is corrupt, founded on atrocity and maintained through violence and secrecy. Brador, Simon, Ludwig, Maria, all of them served the church in their own ways, and all of them were ultimately victims of it. The price of transcendence is perhaps the most important theme in the Old Hunters. The entire expansion is about people trying to elevate themselves or humanity as a whole, trying to become something more than human. But every attempt at transcendence requires sacrifice, usually sacrifices made by others. The villagers of the Fishing Hamlet were sacrificed so Byrgenwerth could study Kos. The patients in the research hall were sacrificed so the Healing Church could make contact with Great Ones. The hunters themselves are sacrificed, their humanity gradually stripped away as they fight to protect others. And in the end, none of it seems worth the cost. The transcendence achieved is hollow, the cosmic beings contacted are indifferent or hostile, and the attempts to elevate humanity only seem to create new forms of horror. The Old Hunters also serves as a meditation on memory and trauma. The nightmare is composed of memories, distorted recreations of real places and events. The hunters trapped there are forced to relive their worst moments, to hunt eternally through blood-soaked streets, unable to escape their past actions. This is a fate worse than death in many ways. Death offers rest, finality, an end to suffering. But the nightmare offers none of these things. It is eternal repetition of trauma, a prison constructed from guilt and shame and violence. Finally, the DLC explores the idea of justice versus revenge. The curse placed by Kos could be seen as justice for the atrocities committed at the Fishing Hamlet. The hunters and scholars who participated deserved punishment for what they did. But the curse didn't distinguish between those who committed the atrocities and those who simply followed in their footsteps. It claimed Ludwig, who had nothing to do with the Fishing Hamlet. It claimed countless other hunters who were simply trying to protect Gehrman from beasts. Is this justice? Or is it simply revenge, striking blindly at anyone associated with the original criminals? The game doesn't provide easy answers to these questions. When you strike down the shadow of the orphan and see Nightmare Slain appear on your screen, you've accomplished something profound, something that reverberates beyond the immediate gameplay into the very fabric of Bloodborne's narrative and thematic structure. You've ended a curse that has tormented hunters for generations, perhaps centuries. A curse that has claimed countless souls and condemned them to eternal suffering. You've freed the spirits trapped in the hunter's nightmare, allowing them finally to rest after what might have been an eternity of mindless hunting, of violence without purpose or end. You've sent the orphan back to the cosmic ocean, where it can be reunited with its mother Kos, ending the child's suffering and completing a journey it should have taken at birth, but was denied by the actions of those who came to the Fishing Hamlet. And perhaps most importantly, you've exposed the Healing Church's greatest secrets, the atrocities that the institution was built upon, the foundation of blood and suffering that underlies all of Gehrman's pretensions to civilization and enlightenment. But the victory feels hollow in ways that are difficult to articulate, tinged with melancholy and regret rather than triumph. The orphan was a victim from the very beginning, a child that never got to truly live, that was torn from its mother's womb and subjected to experiments and violations before being transformed into the focal point of a curse, and you've killed it again, ended its existence a second time. The hunters you've freed were often good people trying to do the right thing, individuals who genuinely believed they were protecting Gehrman and its citizens from a terrible threat, and they spent what might have been centuries trapped in torment, their minds gradually eroding, their humanity slowly stripped away before you release them through death. The secrets you've uncovered, the truth about the Fishing Hamlet and the research hall and all of the healing church's crimes, don't change what happened. They don't undo the massacre. They don't bring back the villagers who were murdered. They don't restore the patients who were transformed into monsters. They don't absolve anyone of their guilt or wash away the stains of sin. You've ended the nightmare, yes, but you can't erase what created it, or undo the damage it caused. The Fishing Hamlet remains a place of tragedy. The research hall's victims remain dead or transformed beyond recognition. The hunters who fell to bloodlust have merely been released from one form of suffering, not restored to what they were before their fall. In many ways, you've simply put a final punctuation mark on a story that was already complete, a tragedy that played out long ago and whose ending you were merely allowed to witness and facilitate. The Old Hunters expansion is From Software at their absolute best, showcasing everything the studio does well and pushing it to new heights of achievement. It takes the lore and themes of the base game and expands them exponentially, providing context and depth that transforms our understanding of Bloodborne's world, while also raising new questions that may never be answered, mysteries that deepen rather than resolve the overall narrative. It introduces unforgettable boss encounters that test your skills while also telling powerful stories through their design and behavior, fights that are mechanically challenging but also narratively meaningful. It creates some of the most disturbing and memorable environments in any video game, locations that burn themselves into your memory, not just through visual design, but through the stories they tell and the horrors they imply. And it does all of this while maintaining Bloodborne's signature style, beautiful and grotesque, tragic and horrifying, epic and intimate all at once, never sacrificing one quality for another, but instead weaving them together into something greater than the sum of its parts. For players who complete the DLC, Bloodborne becomes a fundamentally richer experience, transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Every reference to Ludwig in the main game takes on new weight and new meaning after you've fought him in the nightmare, after you've seen what he became, and understand the full tragedy of his fall from grace. Every mention of the Healing Church's experiments becomes more horrifying after you've walked through the research hall, after you've seen the patients in their various stages of transformation, after you've witnessed firsthand what the pursuit of forbidden knowledge actually looks like in practice. Every moment in the hunter's dream with Gehrman and the doll carries additional melancholy and poignancy after learning about Maria and the Fishing Hamlet, after understanding the guilt that weighs on Gehrman and the tragic love that drove him to create the doll in Maria's image. The DLC doesn't just add content to the game like a typical expansion. It transforms how you understand and experience the entire game, retroactively enriching everything that came before and providing new lenses through which to view familiar elements. The Old Hunters reminds us, through its dark and haunting narrative, that some sins cannot be forgiven or atoned for, that some prices are too high to pay, no matter what benefits might be gained, and that the pursuit of transcendence and forbidden knowledge often leads only to new and more terrible forms of damnation rather than enlightenment. It shows us that institutions founded on atrocity cannot be truly redeemed, that they carry the stain of their original sins no matter how much good they might claim to do afterward, that noble intentions don't excuse terrible actions or make the suffering they cause somehow acceptable. It teaches us that the past never truly stays buried, that sins echo through time and claim victims across generations, that the consequences of our actions extend far beyond what we can immediately see or understand. These are dark lessons, uncomfortable truths that challenge our assumptions and force us to confront difficult questions about justice, revenge, collective guilt, and the price of knowledge. But they resonate because they feel true, because they reflect uncomfortable aspects of our own world and history, because they speak to real concerns about how institutions operate, and how violence perpetuates itself across time. In the end, the hunter's nightmare serves as both warning and prophecy, both historical account and future prediction. It shows what awaits those who become too drunk with blood, too lost in violence, too willing to sacrifice others for their own goals, painting a vivid picture of eternal damnation that feels deserved, yet also tragic. But it also suggests that every hunter, every seeker of knowledge, every person who believes their goals justify terrible means, is walking a path that leads inevitably to this same nightmare, that the conditions that created the curse still exist and will continue to exist as long as humanity pursues transcendence through violence and exploitation. The curse may have been lifted by your actions, yes, the immediate threat neutralized and the souls freed, but the underlying conditions that created it remain unchanged. As long as there are those who seek transcendence at any cost, as long as there are institutions willing to conduct forbidden experiments on unwilling subjects, as long as there are people who hunt and kill and lose themselves to bloodlust and violence, the nightmare can always return in a new form, with new victims, perpetuating the cycle that Kos's curse merely manifested rather than created. Thank you for joining us on this comprehensive journey through the Hunter's Nightmare, through the Old Hunters DLC and all of its dark corners and terrible secrets. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of the Old Hunter's lore, this attempt to piece together the fragmented narrative and understand the full scope of the tragedy, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. Your support makes content like this possible, enables the creation of these lengthy, detailed analyses that attempt to do justice to From Software's complex storytelling, and helps me continue creating these comprehensive lore explorations for other games and expansions. Sweet dreams, good hunters, and may you wake from this nightmare into something better, into a world where the mistakes of the past need not be repeated, and where the pursuit of knowledge doesn't require the sacrifice of human dignity and life.